Big data has found its way into the issue of race in America, but the ability to harness massive amounts of information on the country's demographics is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, big data can be used to immunize people against the claims of racism. Public policymakers can dish up what one sociologist from Duke University called racism without racists. GOP lawmakers in Texas and North Carolina devised congressional districts last year that shored up the power of white voters and diluted the voting power of people of color. Yet lawmakers in both states claim that they took a race-blind approach and never relied on racial data. One Texas attorney called this disingenuous. The people that are in power know where the Anglo voters are. If they threw darts, they couldn't accidentally give that much power to Anglo voters. On the other hand, big data can also be used to combat racial inequality without ever mentioning race. The New York Times reported today that the White House plans to address the disproportionate toll climate change and environmental hazards take on communities of color using race-neutral criteria. They're concerned that using race as a deciding factor to identify at-risk communities might prompt legal trouble and political backlash. So officials are crafting the administration's Justice 40 plan, said that they are relying on other data points. Household income, unemployment rates, air pollution levels, and proximity to waste sites are all criteria used to identify disadvantaged communities, not race. But years of research shows that one of the strongest predictors of which Americans are most at risk of environmental hazards is race. You could say that in this case, data is allows for policymakers to pursue a racial equity policy program without being race specific. It's a very interesting idea. Joining me now to discuss is Mustafa Santiago Ali, Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation. So Mustafa, this is very interesting. You know, this idea of addressing the racial inequities of environmental pollution and environmental impacts without ever directly addressing race. Can that work?
I think it's difficult to do it. You can begin to address some of the impacts that are going on, but taking race out of the equation is like a doctor telling you that you got cancer and that he's only going to treat part of the disease that's going on, because we know the disease has always been racism that was built into transportation policy, that was built into housing policy, it was built into environmental policy, and a number of other policies that we can lay out. And all of the studies, we've got over 40 years of data, going back to the first GAO study in 1983, and then the United Church of Christ and Commission for Racial Justice in 87, Toxic Waste and Race, Dr. Bullard's work around dumping in Dixie. So all of them have shared with us that race is the greatest predictor. So to take that out of the equation makes it so much more difficult to be able to reach the communities that need the help the most.
The reason that a lot of Black and brown people have such close proximity to environmental hazards and also are subject to climate change to such a degree is explicitly because of racial policies, right? So this is not a secret that it was done with a very conscious sense of race in mind. Why is the administration so worried then that undoing it with the same racial consciousness in mind would be problematic and open them to lawsuits and blowback?
Well, a big part of it is just that last point that you talked about, some of the legal case studies that are currently out there. And then we know that the Supreme Court is about to take up another case on the educational side of the equation. So folks are making a political calculation is the way that I would determine it, by saying we can still get to 80% or 70% of the needs that are out there. But that also leaves so many folks unprotected, unfocused upon, and without the direct action that many frontline communities and organizations and many others are saying now is the time. This administration has made environmental justice a top priority. Environmental justice is also a significant driver of those environmental injustices in the climate crisis. So folks are saying in this moment, now, in 2022, we've got to make sure that we are finally rooting out, what has really been going on. And it has been racism playing out in restrictive covenants and redlining and, all these other types of things, zoning and eminent domain. So folks are saying this is the moment. We've got to get serious and we've got to actually finally root it out.
Let me ask you a more philosophical question. Part of what this seems to be saying to me is a continuation of what has been said, for decades, which is you might be able to help Black people who are truly in need of relief as long as you don't say that you're doing it. Philosophically, kind of morally, how does that ring to you?
I mean, it's hollow because it says that we never have to make people fully whole. It's saying that, if you're 70% whole, you're better than you were. But I often say, if I'm still dealing with 30% of the pollution, 30% of the impacts, 30% less or even greater number in disinvestments, then I'm still struggling. So, we in the 21st century here, we don't have to deal with these half paradigms. We can actually do the work that's necessary. We can educate folks and we can put the right policies and processes in place. And yes, it is hard, but folks are expecting us to be bold in this moment. I worked for decades in the federal service, whether on Capitol Hill or in federal agencies. So I understand how tough the work is. I understand how, dedicated individuals are in this moment. But, half a person, 3/4 of a person is no longer acceptable.
Mustafa Santiago Ali, thank you as always for your time. And know this, Mustafa, I will be getting one of those jackets. Next time you come on, we may have matching jackets on. Thank you so much.